Hello. This is going to work way better, and the people online will be able to hear me now. We, once again, are going to talk about piles of cache, managing accounts across AWS Partitions. To do that, my name is David Byron. I work at Salesforce. I've been there for about a year and a half, working on Spinnaker the whole time, and I've been working with Spinnaker for a few years before that. I'm also on the technical oversight committee, so fire away. After this, there'll be room for questions, or after the whole talk, come and talk to me and we can chat about Spinnaker. But let's dive in and see what this talk is really about. To talk about managing accounts across AWS Partitions, we're going to introduce a couple of basic concepts. I'm going to kind of frame the problem that we're going to try to solve and then tell you how we solved it with a couple of other extra related things at the end. So here goes. What is an AWS partition? If you're like me, you may have worked with AWS for a long time and had no idea that there was a thing called an AWS partition, but it turns out that there is really more than one cloud out there in AWS. They're really totally separate, physically and logically isolated, and so it's hard to talk across them. You sort of can't, which ends up being kind of the fundamental problem that I'm trying to solve here. So maybe most of us spend most of our lives running in the standard partition, which we also call the commercial partition. And then one day somebody calls and says, oh, we want to run some stuff in another partition like Gov Cloud, or there's a separate partition for China and some other ones. And then you have to figure out what to do. So the other basic concept to talk about is managing accounts. What are managing accounts? In Spinnaker, most of the time when people talk about accounts in Spinnaker, they're talking about target accounts or managed accounts. I may say target accounts because it's easier to distinguish from managing accounts, but you'll see some documentation on the web that talks about managed. If you want to deploy an auto-scaling group in an account, that's a target account. If you want to operate on a Kubernetes cluster, you want Spinnaker to have a deploy manifest stage, that's operating on a target account, but that's not what this talk is about. This talk is about managing accounts and how you end up getting those. It's sort of the starting point for how you get those credentials to do the work that we were just talking about. So yeah, managing accounts are used to do that assume role operation, and they're also used to do some querying of like region and availability zone information. So let's see some more. This is really very simply what Spinnaker is doing. It starts with some managing account credentials and does an assume role, and that's it. It's very simple. Those credentials, though, those managing account credentials have to come from somewhere. So let's see. Excuse me, I'll put this down. Let's see where they come from. We are about to dive into some code, so get ready. This is actually some code inside the AWS SDK that Quark, which is sort of a shared library and all the Spinnaker components, Quark ends up using, and it turns out that Cloud Driver uses this thing from Quark to do all its work. These are all the places that Spinnaker, and really specifically Cloud Driver, looks for managing account credentials. It can get them from environment variables or system properties or web identities, and this profile credentials provider is maybe the most interesting one from this talk. There is a way to configure the credentials directly in your Cloud Driver local.yaml or directly in Cloud Driver properties, and then they end up getting stuck in environment variables. People do this lots of different ways. The way that we ended up extending this to work for multiple managing account credentials is with profiles. So we'll see more about that in a minute. But no matter where they come from, the key here is that you get one set of managing account credentials, which means they are only going to be for an account in one partition or another, but there's only going to be one. So let's hang on to that for a minute and see where we get. If it turns out you do want to have target accounts in multiple partitions, what do you do? And this is one way to solve the problem. You can run two instances of Spinnaker. So this is why we're talking about saving piles of cache, because nobody really wants this. You'd much rather have target accounts in multiple partitions and one Spinnaker instance. So that's what we're going to try to get to. There's a link to a web page where Amazon actually says it out loud that you can't assume roles across partitions, but you can't. So this is our solution. This is what we came up with at Salesforce and we implemented, and I'm desperately trying to get these code changes upstream. If you want them, come and talk to me. It will help me get them up faster. So we're going to look at some more code in a second. There's some code to, like I said, get region information. It turns out that every time you make an AWS SDK call, you need to give it a region, and regions are partition specific. Like US West 2 works in the commercial partition, but it doesn't work in the Gov Cloud partition. You need to be able to give a Gov Cloud specific region. So we ended up figuring out how to do that by extending this code here. The stuff in bold is the stuff we ended up adding. The Spinnaker AWS region provider is this sort of gnarly down deep class that you wish you never found, but it's in CloudDriver and it's part of this very early bootstrappy thing. It turns out when you're configuring accounts in CloudDriver, you can give some amount of region information with each account. It can be a list of regions, or it can be even as detailed as availability zones within those regions that you want an account to sort of operate in. And if you don't provide that information, well then Spinnaker will try to query it for you using a managing account. But again, the region needs to be provided. So this, in addition to using the profile credentials provider with different profile names, are the way that we ended up enabling multiple profiles. So let's see how to configure it with a caveat here that people are free to get secret information into their CloudDriver however they want. I'm not really trying to cover that here. That first set of secrets is not very secret because it comes straight from an AWS website. Feel free to copy it and try it out. I have no idea what will happen. But yeah, however you do it with some kind of vault and an init container and injecting your secrets into a pod or whatever your story of the day is, you're welcome to do that. But the key here is that you get to define a second profile. Without these changes, Spinnaker and CloudDriver would just read the default one. So this is the sort of paves the way to doing as many as you want, and it could be that the other one is really in Gov Cloud or in China, or it could be an additional one in commercial. The world is your oyster at this point. You can do whatever you want. The other side of this is the sort of region side, which after all the code juggling turns out to be pretty easy to configure. You just add a region, and now Spinnaker knows how to pick it up. So pretty straightforward. And then let's see what happens on the Spinnaker side of things. I don't know how many of you spend your lives looking at these kinds of configuration files, but this is a CloudDriver set of CloudDriver configuration. We added a feature flag. That's that use managing account profile at the top. You can see sort of the original account, a commercial account, the first one, my AWS account. And then there's the new one that at the bottom, my other AWS account that specifies the managing account profile as other, which connects back to the other here and the other here. And you do these things, and you get that picture with one Spinnaker instance and target accounts in multiple partitions. A couple of things to note, and I guess really the most specific thing to note is that assume role field, maybe you can see in the commercial account, it's just a role, and in the Gov Cloud account, it's the whole ARN. Spinnaker has some code to help you do the assume role. So under the covers, it builds out an entire ARM for you because it hard codes ARN and it hard codes the partition identifier for the standard or commercial partition, which is just AWS and IAM, and it grabs the account ID and grabs the role and builds you a whole ARN. But if you go down this road like we did, you'll figure out very quickly that those don't work. So make sure that the assume role is a whole ARN. Take a deep breath here and pause. This is really the guts of the new feature. However, when you kind of go down this road and people ask you to support target accounts in Gov Cloud, they typically ask you to do at least one more thing. And that one more thing is to make sure that you're using FIPS endpoints when you talk to things in Gov Cloud. As a bit of background, Spinnaker uses V1 of the Java AWS SDK. Anybody who's looking for a good contribution to the community who'd like to upgrade that to V2, please come talk to me. We would love for that to happen. It would have made this part of this job a whole lot easier. As it is, now that the work is done, this is all you have to do. You set a couple of config flags and you get the do what I want button. However, the do what I want button is limited. Although the notion of FIPS endpoints, and I guess maybe I should talk about what those are, Federal Information Processing Standard. It's basically a way of making sure that you're using the right cryptographic algorithms and you can be blessed to, address whatever kinds of compliance concerns some people might have. And AWS provides FIPS compliant endpoints sometimes, but not all the time. And there isn't, in V1 of the SDK, there isn't like an easy flag you flip that just says, give me the FIPS compliant ones. You actually have to hand configure the endpoint that you want based on some other magic, which I'm sure I'll apologize for once you guys see the PRs going up into the world. And then to have a chance of knowing whether you did it right, we added some logging functionality, which also turns out to be harder than you thought it would be. So that's really it. I do want to mention some notes here. I guess I talked about the first one a little bit about providing the full ARN. There's another field in the Spinnaker config. It's called default regions, which is, again, supposed to help you so that you don't have to populate regions. If you know that you have target accounts that are all in US West 2 or all in US East 1, you can say that, and then that'll sort of constrain where CloudDriver does its caching work and a bunch of other things that it does. But those default regions can only be right in one partition. They can't be right in multiple partitions. So we didn't try to extend that in any way. Basically what it means is you have to specify the regions that you want in your Gov Cloud accounts or in your non-commercial partition accounts, or set up default regions to work in Gov Cloud and vice versa. Then you have the burden to configure them in your other partition accounts and other partitions. And maybe the one other little key here, and this is something that actually works today with none of the code changes that we've made. If you have Kubernetes clusters, I guess specifically EKS clusters, the Amazon Managed Kubernetes Service, if you have those running in Gov Cloud, you can do the same dance and configure additional managing account credentials in your .aws home directory and mention them in the kubeconfig file, and then you'll magically get cross-partition control of the EKS clusters. So the next slide is a bit of a topic change. It's really about part of the conversation about us getting our Salesforce getting our changes upstream, so you guys can benefit from all this. But I wanted to take a snapshot a few days ago now, but I think it's still pretty legit, of contributions to Spinnaker for the last year. And we've been doing a bunch, and we're going to continue to do a bunch, so have no fear. We're definitely not going anywhere. We're going to keep making changes and keep trying to get our changes upstream. To that end, I have a colleague giving a talk at KubeCon about using Argo workflows, and aren't Argo workflows great? And Argo workflows are great, and I just want to let everybody know that we're using Argo workflows in addition to Spinnaker. They're certainly not replacing Spinnaker. We're actually using Spinnaker to deploy the Argo workflows. So yeah, Salesforce and Spinnaker will be together for quite some time. So I'd like to take some questions and see if anybody has any about this or other Spinnaker topics. All right, you guys are an easy crowd. All right, well, come see me at happy hour later. Oh, there is one. Are you talking about getting the changes we've made upstream or making the changes in the first place? There's a tension. The question for people who are not here or listening online is about what do I mean about the challenge of getting changes upstream? There's a tension. So I'm very grateful that Salesforce pays my full salary to work on Spinnaker. That's my full-time job, is to work on Spinnaker. But sometimes it's internal things, and sometimes it's community things. And so I'd like to be able to spend more time on community things, but I don't always get to spend as much time as I want. So that's the only struggle. Can I ask the room if anybody is interested in a feature like this? Fernando is interested in a feature like this. Excellent. All right, well, thanks everybody for your time. Enjoy the rest of the show.